Hello. First of all, I'd like to say a big thank you for welcoming me to the Woven Conference at Huddersfield University. Today I'm going to talk to you about my agricultural textiles and upcycling, and I'd like to start in my shed. I live in a rural part of Leicestershire, and this little shed with all its dust and dirt became a real special place for me as an artist in the COVID-19 situation. You can see on the left there's an image of the shed with no windows. I got my husband to put some old windows in and recreate this new area. In the next slide, what I'd like to do is just invite you into my shed and take you to a video from 2020 in April, when COVID was at its beginning and we were all feeling a little bit odd. Hello, my name is Sally Gaukrodger, and today I'd like to welcome you to my lockdown shed. The way that I dealt with everything that was happening was I decided to immerse myself in colour and imagination and fantasy, and I just let my painting skills go wild. I think first of all the way that I coped with it was by sort of sketchbook work. So this image here that you see is what I call supermarket bulldogs and lions, or I suppose they're leopards, and it's a triangle, so all the really sort of confident people manage to get their food, whereas at the top you've got the pelt, the one that didn't survive, that didn't get the food. So it was like a triangle of food, which I found really sort of, awful, I suppose. Then I think also the way that I coped as well in sketchbooks, so this is like a sort of godlike creature spitting out all of the viruses. So these were my viruses, and I found that I was working in sketchbooks every night, and this was my sort of initial angry stage, I suppose. And also it was almost like the good guy was gobbling the bad guy in this. There were lots of other things that I did in the sketchbook that were responses, like picture of me hiding under the table and things like that, because that's how we initially felt. And then I decided that I wanted to do something more positive, so there was some sort of outcome from this. So I immerse myself in colour and pattern. So, that's the shed. So welcome to my shed. And the shed sort of set off a lot of thoughts and a lot of inspiration. So I'm going to talk to you about the inspiration, the Trovids installation, and my agricultural textiles installations, and what the benefits of all this were and the future. So if I move on, you can see that experimentation was a really big part of my work. Here we've got agricultural strings starting to creep in, and we've got colour, we've got collage, we've got printmaking, and I had a couple of these sort of old sketchbooks that I was recording the temperature on, whether sometimes it was too hot to be in the shed, and there was just colour everywhere. Any ends of paint I would paint onto the wall, onto a piece of paper. I started to experiment with sort of colouring things, making tools to create some of my textile ideas. I surrounded myself, as I've said in the video, with colour, and to the point where I was even painting the clogs I was wearing in the area. And I used to find that I'd go in and I'd feel a bit like, and then I'd get a bit of paper and I'd get a bit of paint out, and I went into a different world. So the positives for me were absolutely perfect, and it didn't matter what was happening. I was listening to the news, and it was sad, but obviously I sort of managed to listen to it and learn things, but at the same time as creating. I started to see things in a very different way, and here on the left is an image of a cesspit junction that my husband was building in the heat last year, because we live in the middle of nowhere in a small holding, and I started to see the beauty of that and started to think about abstracts. So the abstract paintwork that I do inspires my textile work. And on the right you can see one of my abstracts, which is based on the garden and the cesspit. So all of this sort of experimentation, colour, led on to the Trovid's installation, and this was a competition that was set by the Textile Society, and I had this desire to create something out of all these upcycled things. And just for clarity, Ki-Young Sung, Tim Cooper and Sarah Ketley talked about agricultural upcycling and the definition that it was the creation or modification of a product from used or waste materials, components or products which is of equal or higher quality or value than its compositional elements. And on the right hand side here, there's a multitude of things. This is the start of my, I suppose, obsession with creating outdoor installations. And I was lucky enough to have this featured in the Textile Society, which was a really amazing thing because, you know, I've been bringing up a family, I've given all my time to my children, and now I was starting to, you know, reinvent my creative world. The agricultural textiles and waste items changed and evolved. My neighbour is a farmer, and I kept saying, oh, have you got any more string? What colours of string have you got? What type have you got? Do you know anything about it? And so this sort of obsession became quite obvious, and she was bringing me home bags of string and leaving them by the gate and texting me to say I've brought you some bits and bobs, and I was very excited. So any offcuts that we had, then I would think about how I could recreate those, and it was almost this juxtaposition of the brights and the sort of acidic colours against the beauty of the countryside. And I sort of looked further into plastics, and I was shocked to learn that 85,000 tonnes of waste plastic was produced annually by the agricultural sector, much of which was difficult to recycle due to the contamination of the soil. So the cartons on the right, I think that they had chemicals in actually, but I have recreated them. They are, you know, washed out, cleaned ones, and some of the work that I did in the shed earlier on in the year, these sort of little COVID creatures started to morph into these 3D agricultural pieces. Here again you can see some imagery which shows clearly plastics from agricultural waste, and actually I got great joy at looking at these items. The middle one, which is a big grain sack, I mean, unfortunately it was quite close to the end of harvest, so I'm hoping I can get some more this year, but I was interested in the stitching, the tying and the tubes and the different colorations of the plastics and the polypropylene string. With 44,000 tonnes of these plastics placed on the UK market every year, agri-plastics contribute to at least 60% of agricultural production. However, only 35% of these plastics are collected for recycling. So it's very interesting. You know, I started to think about where does the rest go? What happens? You know, how can we sort of raise awareness of this? Agricultural textiles, you know, experimentation led on to some installations. So living in a rural community, I started to think about what was happening in the world. And this is my Trovid kimono installation, which was, you can't see very clearly here, but the fringes are in order of what was happening in the graphs in the COVID world. Again, here's another image of the Trovid kimono, and I incorporated it made out of agricultural plastics, small numbers of what was happening at the time in the news. And also what I found interesting is when I photographed these, that is the way that the light reflected. And I really had to get to know how to handle the fabrics. It's quite difficult to sew, and it's frays, and you know, it was the bags I had to wash because they'd had birdseed in. So you know, it was just sort of experimenting really. And I tend to do colourful things, but for the first time in a long time I started to really think about the structure of and the materials and the properties of those. if I just move on here as well, thinking about the countryside and the maize growing up and the speed of which, the maize sort of grows and then gets harvested, but yet all of these agricultural textiles still stay there. And I created this giant mask installation to really raise awareness of the littering of used masks. And my installations got sort of more ambitious, really. And the one on the right, raw, which is probably the last one that I did, I started to combine components with this. And I also, if you can see on the left, I started popping up the raw again in the snow. So here you can see raw in the snow and one of the other installations. So I became quite interested in how I could put these outdoors. So what are the benefits in the future? Well, I would say the artistic process, as far as a personal well-being, led on to reflection of how this could really help others, which led on to an art club, which I'll talk about in a moment. I collaborated with next students. I was doing lots of creative things. I had several things on the go, and it completely enveloped me, really. So that was a community embroidery project, which is still taking place. And I set up an art club for staff and students, which for me was a detox, and for students and staff. And I think that was because when we came back to university in January, I thought, my goodness, I don't feel quite as buoyant as I did last year. And I realised it was because I wasn't in my shed. So I tried to bring my shed and some of the experiences that I'd had to other people. So we set up an art club for lockdown. I continue to create ideas for upcycled agricultural textiles, and I've got quite a few plans to work on things in the spring. I tend to work in the shed in the spring. It's a bit cold at the moment, but I'm starting to morph back into there. I might even need a shed extension. My personal practice, I also think I continue to learn new skills which inform my practice, and it gives me that sort of that excitement, and I want to really continue my lifelong learning. And I think that this year has given me a lot of courage, and having an article printed and being invited to speak here has really been fantastic for me, having had several years bringing up kids. So it has been really amazing, and I'm just finding that my creativity and my thought processes are improving, and I'm just getting so much out of it. So through personal practice, this has all helped me inspire my pedagogy, which has helped me try some experimental things online with my students, actually doing some live drawing, etc. And also, I think raising awareness of agricultural waste and linking that with the UN sustainable goals. And this also helps me when I'm trying to help the students that I work with as well understand sustainability and the importance of being sustainable in our world. So this year has been probably the most creative year since I was about 21, because I have been teaching and I was a fashion buyer before that. So it's actually been an amazing creative year. Thank you so much for listening.